Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Raising Capital Seminar Series. I'm Mike Caldwell with the Greater Des Moines Partnership. This afternoon, we will be covering an area called the pitch, or telling your story. And with me to do that, for some of you who are with us this morning, you've already heard me introduce Therese Flynn, but for those who have not, I've known Therese since 2008 or 9. We're trying to decide which year it was, but we met right after the last crisis of financial proportion. Therese's background is a lot of different areas, from consulting with companies to having helped lead a high-scale startup. At Douala, she was really the person in charge of managing the raise. So as COO, she was part of the pitching, but also was probably the key person in actually having to deal with all the pieces and parts of raising the first $32 million that Douala raised. So awesome person. I've enjoyed knowing her for a long, long time, and I know she'll do a great job for us today. This series is collaboration of the Greater Des Moines Partnership, LWBJ, and Brown Winnick Law, and you'll be hearing over the 5 segments, you'll be hearing from speakers from LWBJ, Brown Winnick, myself, and others. So first of all, thank you. We need to change our slides because we don't want you to turn your video off. Leave your video on. We want to see you. We'd like to have more interaction. More is better on the interaction side, so please do that. The chat window will be open during the session. I'll be posting some links to files and things out there. We'll be providing you the actual deck in PDF format. We actually have a practice deck that we provide as well on doing your own slides for the pitch. And so I'll be sharing this out there. Please, please, please ask questions. This is a lot more fun for everybody if there's Q&A versus we talk, you listen. And I will also say there will be a recording of this available. We'll make that available probably within the next couple of days. So if for some reason you want to go back and look at it, for those of you who may not be able to make all the sessions, you'll be able to get recordings of all the sessions. And as someone who is registered, you'll get emails letting you know when all that's happened. The agenda, we did module 1 this morning, the fundraising steps to raising capital. This afternoon is the pitch. And then we'll have a weekly event going forward, module 3 next week on the 14th from 8:30 to 11:30-ish on building a strong financial model. On the 21st, we'll be working on the cap table, and on the 28th, the term sheet. All these are critical. You're going to hear us talking about them throughout the seminar series. So if you all can make the time, definitely join us for these. So with that, I'm going to, Therese, I think I have to make you co-host again. Let me just do that right now. All right, you should be good to go, Therese. I will stop sharing my screen.
All right, just want to do a quick check. Is the size okay on that? Can you see my screen okay?
Looks good to me.
All right, I'm also going to just pull up video over here. It's great to see a lot of the same familiar faces from this morning, and welcome a few new faces. As Mike said, please feel free to use the chat, or frankly, I'm fine with being interrupted. Just interrupt us. When we do this in person, I feel like it's much more of a conversation than me standing in front of everyone saying, here, this is how you do it. So don't let Zoom get in the way to making this a conversation and asking any questions that you might have along the way. Our goal this afternoon is also to provide a fair amount of work time and interaction. I'm not just going to be talking about telling your story. We're going to be breaking and having you actually work on a pitch deck as we go along. So for those of you that have already started a pitch deck or not, be prepared to kind of open up a file on your computer and do some work as we go through this. So starting off, there's a lot of conversation around the ideal pitch deck and the best way to tell your story. I think to start with, I would say if your idea, your execution, your momentum are lacking, then no deck is going to get you investors. And I can't highlight enough how important a solid business with momentum is over a really flashy, sound good, salesy pitch deck. As investors really get to know you, they will dig in and see if there's more than a pretty pitch deck. And so, although oftentimes a pitch deck is necessary, it can't be the end all be all of how you raise capital. When we think about the typical pitch deck slides, one thing, pause 1 second. Mike, are you seeing, okay, here we go. Everything was highlighted, which was
Yep, you fixed
highly
it.
annoying for me. So looks like we were able to take that off. All right. So thinking about the typical pitch deck slides, I provided 3 examples of which slides would normally be included. So 500 startups, they have kind of a view of what are the 12 normal slides they would like to see. Sequoia Capital, a well-known venture capital firm, they have 10 to 11 slides they like to see. Airbnb, their very first pitch deck, what were they successful raising on? You can see what their pitch deck included. So there's a lot of commonality here. It's pretty normal that you would start with problem and solution, maybe move into the why now, what's the market validation, giving an overview of your product, market size, business model. I think this unique 500 startups really likes to highlight what's your underlying magic, is what they call it. Moving on to including competition, competitive advantage, some differentiate, showing competition plus a competitive advantage. Going into how do you plan on bringing your product to market? How do you plan on marketing it? Who is your team is always an important slide. Maybe you would highlight who your board advisors are, traction, milestones, any press you may have, how much you're fundraising. If you kind of, what are the deal terms? What do you look on doing with that? And what's the use of those funds? So as you can see, you wouldn't pick all 16, 17, 18 of those. You'd kind of pick the 10, 11, 12 that tell your story the best. I often recommend everyone to potentially pull all these slides together and put some in the appendix, and try to narrow the key pitch down to 11 or 12 slides. I think the thing that is also interesting right now in the times of Zoom and not a lot of in-person meetings, we're also starting to see people take this format and think about how can they make a 2 to 3 minute compelling video. We're not going to spend time on that today, but it's something that I'm starting to see more often in the time that we're currently operating in a Zoom world. In those kind of even videos though that people are making, they're following kind of this kind of condensed storyline. So instead of it being an 8 to 10 minute pitch, they're kind of going through this and narrowing it down to like, what are the 2 to 3 minute teaser piece to get an investor interested. I'm going to pause there. Any questions on which slides you typically would kind of pull together to start to tell your story? I'm just checking chat. Doesn't look like there's anything yet. Again, feel free to chat any questions or interrupt us as we go. Use Google for examples. I don't know about you, but I sometimes operate better not on a blank slate. And Google has been my friend for many, many years. Just going out there and seeing examples how other people are talking about their startup can be really beneficial, especially if you're starting, from scratch. It might be a way to kind of jumpstart you and seeing, what are different ways that people talk about the problem? What are different ways in which they're looking at their market, competitive analysis, etc. Telling a compelling story. I recommend really short, punchy verbiage and not having tons of words on a slide. At the end of the day, unlike this seminar, right, where we have a lot of words on this seminar because we're hoping that people can use this as a takeaway later. But when you're telling your pitch, it's okay that there's less words on on your slides. And ultimately, you want to position your pitch that it's a story. It's something that the investors are listening to you talk about your startup rather than spending the time reading a bunch of information on a deck. I like this, a compelling deck can tell a story through your headlines alone. So if you think about titles, instead of maybe just saying team, what if instead you said the right mix of passion and experience in your kind of headline title? There was a whole blog that I read of some investors don't actually read the content of your pitch. They just read the headlines to kind of get like, am I interested or not? So what are the headlines telling them if they just kind of skimmed over it really quickly? Do they want to learn more? Is it compelling enough to say, yeah, let's take this meeting to learn more about this company?
Teresa, if I may. One thing to keep in mind as you're thinking about building this deck, please remember that, first of all, this is your first meeting deck. This is the deck or the presentation you give when they don't know who you are. And so a couple things to think about. One, you don't want to answer all their questions in the deck. You're trying to get a conversation going. You want them to talk to you. You want them to ask questions. So if you put every word possible on the slide, if you answer every question, they're like, okay. There's not a lot left for them to do. And remember, the slide is there to support you in presenting. As an investor, I really don't want to read your slides. I don't want you to read your slides. I want to listen to you. And if the deck helps me hear your story, that's great, but it is in support of the story you tell. It isn't the story on its own.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point. In the day where people were having coffee meetings, you might not even bring a deck to that coffee meeting. I know that it's pretty natural in at least Des Moines that you might sit down and just get to know someone. It's good to have that deck prepared where you're kind of thinking about organizing your thoughts. But you don't always use this deck of, here, let me be very formal going through my presentation. As you're working on the deck, I would say, avoid kind of the phrases that are obvious but not really impactful, like disruptive, innovative, world-class. I think investors, we get so sick of seeing disruption or say everyone's innovative, so they kind of have no meaning after a period of time. Also, as you're structuring your deck, think about how it is your voice. Ultimately, you need to be really comfortable telling the pitch, and you want your enthusiasm for your idea and what you're building to come through. So don't let some structure that doesn't serve you kind of get in the way. Think about, ultimately, it's like it's storytelling. So how do you use a structure that is authentic to you and what you're building, and really using the language that you would normally use to have a discussion. I love this little graph, and Mike, we probably could find a new one because I feel like the attention, it doesn't even take 5 minutes anymore, maybe 30 seconds. Yeah. I was reading a study in the last 6 months that said that the average person has like an attention span of 15 seconds or less. So this 5-minute attention going down is pretty generous given the current environment we live in. So, overall, the assumption is if you get an hour meeting that you get an hour of attention. I think that that's just incorrect. The first 2 minutes are so critical, in the first 30 seconds in hooking the audience interest for wanting to learn more. And you may think about that of, where do you even want to start off? Do you want to get jumbled into, here's me and here's all my personal story and me, or do you want to jump right into the hook, line, and sinker of what's the exciting idea? What's the vision for your company? What's the problem you're solving? Think about how do you want to hook that person to learn more and spend more time with you and stay engaged. All right, so I'm going to ask all of you to pull open a document or maybe grab some pencil and paper, whatever serves you best. We're going to get into the active working session next. If you have a deck you've already started, you might want to pull that open. If you don't have a deck, firing up Google Docs or PowerPoint.
Therese, I put the sample deck out there. So
Perfect.
in the chat, the bottom link there is a deck that matches the outline of this presentation. So if you just want to open that up PowerPoint, you can work from there.
Perfect. All right, so on your cover slide, the value proposition often is kind of the tagline on your cover slide. And this positioning statement is a statement that explains the who, what, how, why your company exists. Steve Blank gives a really, really succinct template in how he suggests doing this. It is, we help X do Y by doing Z. So then an example of that in practice, we help non-technical marketers discover return on investment in social media by turning engagement metrics into revenue metrics. So this is like the one line that would help an investor understand a little bit about you even before he or she gets into the deck. There's a few other examples here. Mint.com is the free, easy way to manage your money online. I really like that one. That's very, very simple. So as you think about your company's value proposition, answering the who, what, how, and why, how do you go about describing that? I'm going to give you a few minutes to pull out. Maybe you already have a value proposition statement, or maybe you have to kind of start to write out who do I serve? What do I do? How do I do it? Why do I exist? And here's an example. One of the companies that went through the insurance accelerator several years ago, they were able to, show both their product and a value proposition. They're a digital customer engagement platform for the insurance industry. Again, very, very succinct in what they do. If anyone brave wants to share their value proposition, feel free to throw it in chat.
Come on, all you brave people. I'm an investor. Pitch me. Here we go.
I'm the money. I like I'm the money. Well, a bit of it. Okay, well, that leaves us hanging. That's an interesting approach. Who do you serve? Others. Aaron, do you have your value prop, or is it still a work in progress?
I'm working on it right now.
Okay.
Aaron should be, we get more out of the wind. More power from the wind.
Answer is blowing in the wind. It's more of a motto, though.
One of the things I found is as people work on this, the who, what, how, why, I have found that sometimes it's very clear, this is easy for some to do. Others, it's like working through the deck and coming back to it, right? As you gain more clarity in how you tell the story and you think about, who is your customer? What do you offer? I would invite everyone to revisit this, even at the end of the next hour and a half, as we thought more through what your strategy is, how you tell your story. You might have a different lens on it after we spend this working time. So let's see, Aaron, we give engineers the tools to design cheaper wind turbines. The one thing that I would maybe follow on, and I understand Steve Blank's template doesn't always answer this, but why is that important? Why does the world need that? And that might not be a question you're ready to answer now. I think it's one to continue to drive into is why is that important? All right, so as we move on from the cover slide and, coming up with that punchy value proposition from the to start, then we move into slide 1, and typically people start with like, what is the problem? And I think it's important to say typically, coming back to using your authentic voice, structuring these in a way that is natural for you is something you should give thought on. There are plenty of blogs out there and preferences. Some investors say, I want to start with a team. Tell me who you are. Tell me why I should believe in you, and kind of pitch me on you before you get into the rest of the company. Then you can read another blog from an investor who says, I don't care about who you are. Tell me why there's a big, massive problem first. And if you've convinced me it's a big, massive problem, then I'll care to know who you are and why you're going to solve it. So I give you those two examples for there's no exact right way to do it. It's doing kind of research ahead of times too. If you are going to pitch someone who has written stuff online on how they like to be pitched, you might change your pitch for them. If they have a very specific way that they like to hear the story, then consider that. Otherwise, just consider what comes natural to you, play around with the order, and go from there. So as you think about the problem that you're going to be solving, what is the problem? What customer pain point or are you alleviating? Why does your company exist? And I think more importantly, there are times where as entrepreneurs, you create something, but you're not quite sure who the customer is. And I would say this can get you in trouble. You might look like a solution looking for a problem than saying, here's the problem I'm solving. At the end of the day, if you can't convince an investor that there's something wrong, that there's something broken, that there's an opportunity, they're likely not going to be interested in the solution. And as entrepreneurs, sometimes we want to jump right to like, look at this really cool thing I built. But as an investor, if you put on the investor mindset, they want to understand what the problem is. So convince them there is a problem, and then you get to talk, kind of earn the right, hook them to earn the opportunity to talk about the solution. So I'm going to share a couple examples of what problem slides might look like.
If I could step
Go
in
ahead.
real quick, I just would drop two things. We said this morning, but I'm going to repeat it for those who weren't here. There's an example was given to me and others recently in a training session that said, is the problem oxygen, aspirin, or jewelry? How important is the problem? And so while you don't use those words, this is oxygen, but this is crucial to the success of these businesses. This is solving a huge pain point with a lot of dollars behind it. So, why is, when you're talking about the customer pain, this is the important part, is to emphasize your knowledge of what that pain is. My average customer is over-engineering their wind bills by a factor of $250,000 in build cost. Something like that. I'm picking on Aaron now, but and be clear that this is a top problem to solve for the company. It isn't just this is an irritant, but this is a big one to solve.
Mike, can you give an example of what might be a difference between an oxygen and an aspirin problem would be?
Sure. So if you're in a traditional industry like the auto industry, so if you're a manufacturer and I'm trying to sell you something to take you into the electronic car market, you're not going to survive building internal combustion engine cars long term. All right. So my solution may be the oxygen to keep you alive. Whereas the aspirin is you're forced to constantly look for new employees because your company doesn't scale well. So every time you want to get bigger, you have to keep adding more and more people or more and more machines. I'm going to show my solution reduces the incremental need of new people and new products each time you grow the company.
So we're going to give a couple examples of how you could potentially look at your problem slide. So this is a local company. They're called Make You Safe, and this is the way that in the past they've positioned their problem. Workplace accidents are a global problem. Every minute, 500 workers are injured in work accidents globally. Every day, more than 1,000 workers die in work accidents globally, and every week, 1.2 billion is paid out on worker compensation claims in the U.S. One thing that I really like about the way that they framed up their problem is using numbers to paint a picture for how big this problem is. They didn't just say, people die, you know, accidents are a global problem. People get hurt. People get into work accidents. Worker comp claims are on the increase. They could have watered it down, but instead they went and they found very specific numbers. And when you think about 1,000 workers dying every day, I mean, that's a pretty startling fact. They also kind of, I think, have done a nice job thinking about the audience of who this different like impacts. You know, lives matter, but also like the numbers, the impact in dollars and cents, and workers' compensation matters. So hitting all those data points really leads to a compelling, massive global problem that they're solving. Insure Me, I'm also going to give an example of their problem statement. They didn't go as far as saying there's a problem. They reframed it slightly to say these are the challenges of the insurance industry. And so their challenge that they're helping solve is insurance companies are having difficult finding relevancy with millennials who prefer a digital experience in 3 core areas. And so they start to talk about like the insurance challenges that they have in a digital online capacity. So sales, claims, and customer support. The industry challenges, how do they serve and take care of those areas in a digital experience? So with that, we're going to give you a few minutes. I'm going to say maybe like 1:30. I'll give you 3-4 minutes to start to think about how are you framing up your problem. What are you solving? What customer pain point are you alleviating? Why does your company exist?
Sharice, I think when you're clicking on your screen that you're causing some of those highlights.
Yes. I'm like trying to click
Okay.
it off. All right. I realize 3-4 minutes is not probably enough time to completely map out your problem statement, but hopefully enough time to get you thinking. Any questions, any struggles, anyone care to share the way that they're thinking about their problem?
Sharice, we've got a quiet group today.
Yeah, we're not going to force you to talk, but want to give you the opportunity in case you wanted any feedback. All right, moving on to solution. So the solution side really should seek to explain how you alleviate the pain and problem. Also, without getting too technical at this point, you still want to keep the high level. What do you solve for someone? But it might be helpful in your heading to say how you solve that. Is it a web platform? Is it SaaS? Is it hardware? Something that gives them a little, like an investor, a little foray into how you go about doing it. So in this case, Insure Me says, we're a white labeled platform designed to guide consumers through the entire insurance customer journey. They then go into, we do that for sales, claims, and service. And they talk about how ease of use, efficiency and claims, and under the customer service, how they aim to reduce operational cost. So you can almost take this and mirror if these are the problems, if the problem, to go back to Make You Safe, is an increase in worker comp, deaths per year, they would mirror that here and say we decrease worker comp claims, we decrease the amount of accidents, and they use decreasing slips, trips, and falls within an environment. You still keep it really high level. You don't get into the, this is the product solution, but you talk about how do you make the life of your customer easier? How do you alleviate their pain? Same as before, we're going to give you guys a little bit of time to work on this. If there's questions or comments, feel free to chat. Otherwise, why don't you dig in and think about how your company solves the problem for customers. One thing as you are working here, using kind of strong language like increase, decrease. It's often what we see here of do you increase revenue? Do you decrease operating expense? Do you increase efficiency? I mean, those might be words that you think about using as you think about talking about your solution. Okay, I'm gonna start picking on people. Mark, how are you doing at explaining your solution?
Sorry, I was on mute.
No problem.
Yeah, I think we've got a pretty good solution slide on our deck. We start with the IMC integrated technology solution delivers accurate real-time information to senior care providers that they can use to create better processes and better staffing.
So you solve the problem of staffing in some sense. You increase kind of process the efficiency. Talk to me a little bit, like, ultimately, how does that make your customers' lives better? What's the end result?
Improved resident care, improved staff utilization, improved staff engagement, improved staff preparedness, which reduces turnover, better resident care, increases revenue.
Okay. And do you state those on your solution side?
Yes.
Okay. I kind of like where
I'm finding it's probably too lengthy in text, because on a text slide, it has a full slide of text, which probably needs to be more efficient.
Right. I almost like where you ended the last couple statements. You got to the kind of root at the end.
Yep.
So what if you boil those up and focus on that first, right? Because the other things were kind of like how you go about doing that. But ultimately, it was to affect those 1, 2, 3 areas that you stated last. And I think there's this tendency of wanting to take people step by step.
Right.
But as an investor, I'm kind of like, okay, that seems incremental to ultimately, what does this do for the customer? I might pick on someone else. I'm sorry, is it Buckaloo? Is that Andrew? I don't know who everyone's names here.
Yeah, I don't know why. My first name is Kevin. I'm
Kevin.
not sure.
Okay.
So,
Kevin, if you think about your solution, how do you go about explaining your solution?
we work with contractors, specifically electrical contractors. So I go about explaining to the contractor how we can simplify their methods of estimating and offer them a way to compete more accurately in the arena that they're competing in, or compete in a new arena that they may be trying to compete in.
So when you think about competition, is that ultimately helping them win more business? Why does competing matter? Like, what does that actually solve for them?
I guess a couple of ways. Obviously winning more work when you're bidding against other contractors. But then competing in a different arena, we see a lot of residential contractors that would like to work in the commercial industry, and they may not have an accurate way to estimate to win the projects.
So it's like one of the solutions, you might say, like opening up new opportunities or bigger opportunities.
Yeah, opening up bigger, better opportunities.
Yeah, opening up bigger, better opportunities, increasing win rate. Maybe you want to state that differently. Driving efficiency, things like that. Again, like I encourage everyone, start with like kind of what comes to mind, but then how do you like boil this up even higher? Like competing is good, but you compete to win, right? So really
Right.
is the solution helping people win? For just, an example.
Thank you.
Aaron, anything you want to riff on your solution?
Yeah, sure. So the problem that I'm trying to alleviate with this isn't what I've written here, but I'm just trying to give you some context. The problem is wind turbine OEMs are over designing wind turbines because their modeling software they use is over predicting loads. So I wrote that this causes an increase in cost of manufacturing, transportation, and installation of wind turbines by roughly $12,000 per turbine. And it allows wind turbine OEMs to win in a hyper-competitive market that demands 10% cost reduction year over year.
So, sorry, the solution is allowing win by better estimation. Is that right?
Yeah, it would allow them to decrease the cost of the manufacturing, transportation, and installation of wind turbines.
Okay. Yeah, so the solution decreases estimating, well, decreases the cost I get of the project, allowing them to win more work.
Right.
Can you provide at some point, it might be interesting, as an investor, I'm like, okay, $12,000 per wind turbine, that's a lot, but also having seen this recently, my parents have a couple on their property. It seems like those companies are just wasting money left and right. So convincing me that someone actually cares about $12,000 if they've had any access to that industry, in the sense of like they say they care about cost, but I bet they wasted $5,000 on just silly stuff. And my parents, like, when they installed theirs. So how you convince me at scale, why does $12,000 matter? Might be something interesting. So if you think about who your customer is, 12,000 times, you know, does that end up being like a couple multi-million-dollar problem per year?
Right.
Does that lost
Yeah.
opportunity, things like that? You could help use some numbers in your both problem and solution, to talk to like the magnitude of the problem.
Sure. And I have numbers like it could reduce the amount spent on wind turbine blade material alone by $33 million in the US annually.
Awesome. Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. I think things like that help people get their head around it. Anyone else want to share kind of the way they're thinking about problem solution? I'm not going to make anyone, but I think it does help others even learn from each other. Okay, getting into, I feel like this is everyone's favorite area, talking about your product, talking about the technology. When you start to get to your product, this really should be how you demonstrate how your product works. Screenshots, photos, demos are very helpful, and helping an investor get, okay, is this a desktop solution? Is this an app on my phone? Is it, you know, a SaaS platform? Is it via API? Is it a physical product? What is it? Is it a combination of all of those? In this case, I'll show you again, Insure Me. I'm going to keep using kind of Insure Me as Make You Safe examples. So they're talking about the technology they provide for insurance claims, and it's both a software platform that you log into on the desktop, as well as there's some mobile app capabilities. They go right into their features, and I think for them it was important to sort of get into the features. There's a lot of noise in their space, so they differentiated themselves a little bit, and like what does their technology do differently than others, and getting into some of the benefits. I'm gonna then move forward. Make You Safe. They have both a physical product and a software product, and for them, it's important to show the advancements in both. You know, you might this is a sensor that someone would wear on their arm. If you just look at a sensor, you might be like, oh, great, like it's a sensor. But each one of these, you know, arrows is something that they spent, you know, the last several years really defining, redefining, and making better. So for them, showing every little aspect here of, hey, this little thing does something very special and unique. I think this is a great way to show the complexity of the product without going into depth of like, what do all those things mean? It really opens the conversation for someone wants to say, hey, talk to me about the voice submit. What does that do? Talk to me about how Bluetooth or Wi-Fi might work. Again, they don't go into detail here, but it starts to paint the picture of just how complex their product offering is. Most of the time, if you just have like a SaaS product or a hardware product, you just focus on one. Because they're both hardware and software, they have 2 slides when it comes to product. The next one going through what their software solution does. They highlight here that it's a SaaS platform, and they show very, you know, different screenshots of what does this look like both on a desktop, what do the data analytics look like, what does the app component look like. some people really are geared towards wanting to give a demo right here for their product. And I would just say, be very careful with going into a demo. One, I would never recommend kind of off the cuff demo. If you're going to give a demo of your product, it should be something pre-recorded. And you really probably don't want to spend more than 30 seconds going into it. This is not the opportunity to spend 2-3 minutes on a product video. This should just be kind of a little entry into someone understanding, okay, it's software. Oh, okay, it has a mobile experience, or it just has a desktop experience. You don't have to get deep into the solution at this point. And it's sometimes a place where you can honestly lose your investors because I think if you have a technical background, you want to kind of geek out here. And you got to be careful that you don't go too deep too early in the conversation. We're not going to workshop this one at this point, but does anyone have any questions on how you would represent your product? Do you think it's easy? Are there challenges that you are facing and wondering how to overcome them? Another kind of piece of advice I might offer is I've seen people start when you're building your deck, you might have 3 or 4 or 5 product slides as a starting point, right? Just start to dump in there. How would I explain my product? And then you might be able to back up. Okay, here are all the different components. Now, how do I, again, boil this up into something less than 3 or 4 slides? All right, market size. Mike, we were just going through product. We're not going to workshop that one. Do you have any tidbits based on what you've seen on product? The one tidbit I offer is don't go too deep. You know, as sometimes tech background founders, they go kind of down a rabbit hole here. So keeping it high level. Any other thoughts that you would offer?
Yeah, when you're talking about your solution, you want to reemphasize the value proposition. So you're not showing me a screenshot to show me how pretty your graphical interface or UX is, right? I mean, that's not the point. The point of showing me something that's a screenshot or whatever is to underscore it's how it solves or how it supports your value proposition. So and I can't, it's probably too small to look at, but if I were to make you safe, I'd be showing a report of potential instances of safety violation. In other words, I might say, here's a screenshot of what is seen by a plant manager upon a major incident. There's an immediate update on his phone that texts him. Here's the daily summary. Here's the, I might do something like that. I'm not going to do all those things, but I'm going to do something that supports my value prop.
Thanks, Mike. The other thing that I would maybe cautionary tale is showing where your product is going in the future versus where it is now, and being clear on what the current state is. It's okay if you're really early in product development and you put maybe wireframes or mock-ups of the future. That's totally fine. Just be very clear though with an investor of we're actively in development and this is what we're building towards, versus showing something that is so far from reality and an investor thinking, oh, that's the current state. So just be very candid as where does the product sit today versus, if there's a big vision of where it's going in the future, that you're just clear on that. I think the other thing that I've noticed is, so make you safe. This was a couple, probably from a year and a half ago, where they were actively building towards this. Today, I think they represent it differently. They actually show the physical, they probably show a physical picture of someone wearing it, because it shows the difference of what was in prototype and what's being used now. So there's different ways to kind of represent that in the way that you build these slides. Market size. This one's a big one for an investor. They want to understand how big is the market and how big of an opportunity is at hand. And you can read a lot of information on how setting out market sizes. There's kind of an academic way of doing it, and I say kind of the investor startup way of doing it. One of the things as an investor that I like to see is sort of the math of, I'm going to just kind of highlight down here, this end kind of area where essentially they walk me through the steps of if they got 4% of the market with a carrier ACV, so their annual contract value of 360,000, this would result in 150 million annual recurring revenue. And as an investor, what I understand there is by 4% of the market, if they're able to have a $360,000 contract size, that they have a path to 150 million annual recurring revenue. I have seen too often where people just put these huge market sizes together of like the insurance market is $1 trillion market. Okay, great. Show me how you're going to make money in that. The ag market is $1 trillion bazillion dollars. Okay, great. How are you going to extract any value out of that? And so that's where I say there's kind of the difference between how you think about academic market size and how, as an entrepreneur, you use market size as a way to sell the opportunity that you have in front of you, and you kind of break it down into what is your path to like significant revenue. So I'm going to kind of break this down even further. So the
Can I stop you there?
Yeah. Go ahead,
So
Mike.
keep in mind that when you do this, you don't have to say market size and the number of customers. You can talk about, if you're in the car business, you can talk about the number of cars. If you're in the windmill business, how many windmills get designed every year? So there may not be a lot of manufacturers of cars, but there may be a lot of cars manufactured. So use market size numbers in relation to making your opportunity seem as large as you can.
I think in the ag tech accelerator, I once saw someone say there's this many pigs. So if we sell, but they came back with unit economics. It just wasn't how many pigs, but it was like basically the value they provide per piglet. So you were able to extract like a real value, a real number based on their company. So in this case, their customer, what they sell to are the insurance companies. So they started with a global number. Sometimes you may start global, maybe you'll start with US. You kind of decide, this is you kind of make these choices. They started globally. They said globally there are 15,000 insurance carriers around the world. And of those 15,000, they made a further break here. So that's their total available market. Then moving into what's serviceable, they said 10,500. 70% of those insurance carriers lack a robust digital customer engagement platform. Something to note is if you make statements that break your total available into serviceable, be ready to defend. How are you coming up with that data? Where are you getting the data? And then that's where they were able to say, you know what, if we capture 4% of that 10,000, we have a $150 million opportunity. One of the questions I often kind of field from entrepreneurs is like, okay, 150 million opportunity by when? You don't have to necessarily state that. You don't have to say, hey, this is in 3 years or this is in 10 years. It's more saying, hey, if I'm able to capture 4 or 5% of the market, this is where I'd be at. Another kind of pitfall that I see as you're thinking about market size is too much market penetration. So to get to any sort of valuable annual recurring revenue, saying I'd have to have 40% of the market. I think that raises a red flag for an investor of like, wow, you have to have a substantial part of the market to get to valuable recurring revenue. The other thing is if the market size, the recurring revenue you think you can get is less than 100 million, I would say that like most investors who are interested in a big opportunity, unfortunately 100 million, less than 100 million might not be big enough for them. And I know as an entrepreneur that seems crazy. You're like, dang, if I could get to $100 million, my life would be set. But again, you're trying to convince an investor long term, is there a 10x opportunity here for them to, is this a really big market size? Other things, be very clear. Is this global? Is this US? How are you thinking about the market size? Other times there's like, you're going after niche verticals. So you might start in one niche and go into another niche. and how important is that vertical 1, vertical 2, vertical 3 for you to get to a substantial market size. Sometimes those markets can be hard to clump all together. So I've seen people put together multiple market sizes. Like this is an odd example, but in the canine market, if I captured this much of the market, it would look like this. If I moved into the bovine market, it would look like this. So you can show multiple markets if you plan on expanding to different verticals. Questions on developing your market size. Is it clear for a lot of you, or is this really challenging? I see some markets being very, very clear and the data being very clear. Other times, you know, frankly, getting to data can be challenging. I'm just going to read here. There's a chat here. What is the best way to gauge how much of a market a startup can capture? Is there a standard method, rule of thumb, or is it just understanding your market and product positioning? I mean, I feel a lot of it is understanding your market and product positioning. I personally maybe lean to like 10% or less. Like if you can capture 10% of the market and have a substantial opportunity, I think it's really compelling. If you're relying on capturing a lot of the market to become really large, I think that that's somewhat problematic. Based on, I mean, your startup and you're going to have limited capital the next, 5 to 7 years. So it's like, how fast can you get to a reliable market share? And as an investor that I somewhat believe is doable with the resources that we know startups have. Does that answer your question? Thanks. Mark, I might pick on you because I know that you're kind of in an active fundraising. How do you frame up your market size?
So we know the total number of assisted living and skilled nursing facilities in the US.
Okay.
We then know how many are controlled or operated by the 50 biggest operators in each of the SNF and AL world. And then we basically say if we can get, 5% of each of those, that basically becomes 1% of the total market.
Okay. And are you able to put a value then? So if you get 1% of the market, what's your annual contract value and what would that mean for potential revenue for you?
So that's our target for 5-year growth is 1%. That basically equates to 15 million in revenue. 15
million.
Yep.
Okay. So for the investor, I would say, that 15 million for you is like a very achievable, like a pathway, right?
Right.
If I'm an investor and say, great, but like I want 100 million opportunity, how would you get to 100 million, Mark? Is it increasing the contract value? Is it, wow, I need to have 20% market penetration? I mean, how are you thinking about this being, larger than 15 million?
Part of this is understanding and knowing our market, which does not change quickly and does not adopt technology quickly. So our background of our founders is we're senior living professionals. That's what we've done for the last, 75 years amongst us. So part of it is, we know we're not going to show 100 million in recurring revenue in 5 years. We're realistic about that. Do we think we can get there? Absolutely. But it's not going to happen in 5 years.
Right. So I might say, I like the realism. Don't let conservatism hurt you either. And so maybe it's not in 5 years, but, in 10 years, could this be a much bigger opportunity? And if you expand it out, how it.
I would think, absolutely. Within 10 years, it could be 150 million in annual revenue. But, again, maybe I'm more realistic and pragmatic than I should be for this startup world. But I know there's 100,000 different things that could go wrong in that time too. So
right.
trying to be as realistic as possible.
And I have to say that I think investors kind of can appreciate both, right? They see numbers thrown around all day and they're like, this entrepreneur has no clue how they would actually accomplish that. But then also being on the too conservative side can sometimes also shut off opportunities where they're like, they're just not thinking big enough. And so if you have a view on, the bigger view, I would encourage you to think about how to weave it in while still kind of remaining authentic to this is what we believe is possible within this window of time. But if we get this window, there's absolutely this bigger opportunity, and don't shy away from showing the big opportunity. And you don't have to say like that big opportunity is within 5 years, but if we were able to capture, maybe it's just showing from 1% to, if we had 10% of the market, this is the opportunity that we see. Now let's, break that down further to what we think is realistic the next few years. So there's a way to kind of bridge both and still be authentic and real. Other comments, feedback on how you're thinking about market size. Is everyone able to get to the ability to show kind of what their reoccurring revenue would be? I'm seeing some no's.
I would just add in from the investor side that your projections are probably wrong, and we understand that. So if you get really specific of what your projections are, that's kind of a red flag. So I really agree with Cherise said in terms of if you can, say, if we achieve this result, we could have a piece of that, then great. That's a vague statement, but it's not a wrong statement versus, in 3 years, we're going to be making 1.25% of whatever. And then I'm like, if you knew that, then you should be in the stock market and not do your business because you could project, much greater returns. So
right.
You don't have to be right on the head of what it's going to be.
Yeah, it's somewhat saying, assumption 1, assumption 2, assumption 3 could lead us down this path. And I think every investor knows that there's 4 or 5 other assumptions that actually play into how it all shakes out. It's just painting the picture of a big opportunity.
Trish, you mentioned something just in passing, but I'll throw it out there for Mark and for others. It is so much easier to sell an existing customer another product than it is to go find a new customer. So as part of your growth strategy, I think that all of you can think about, all right, once they trust me, what else can I sell them? And Mark, I know nothing about the business you're in, other than my mother lives in one of those facilities. But I think about the trust it must take to get them to really believe in you. And then how much can you leverage that trust? Maybe the story on years 6 through 10 may be, we're going to build that trust in year 1 through 5 by solving their first critical problem. They have 14 other problems to solve. We have the opportunity to build out a suite of products that takes them from 9 different vendors to 1, where they'll be spending half as much money, but we'll suddenly end up with 18% of the total market, not 5. If you could tell a story like that, it's a very believable thing. If you can build trust with the customer, they'll buy more from you.
Aaron, I saw you went off mute for a second there. Did you have a question, comment?
Yeah, I guess the question is, I'm starting to be able to understand the value that I can get for my customers, right? So say, for example, I'm generating $100 million for a value for the customer if they use my tool. I mean, how do I project, how much of that should I, would be our cut?
Right. So some of that, I understand you're probably early enough that you don't know what you're charging per customer. Is that kind of where you're at?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's different ways to approach that. One might be taking a stab of what you think you annually are going to charge. And that's a big assumption, right? Of, hey, we think we're going to be able to annually charge our customers $50,000 or $10,000 or $100,000. Some of that might just be making an assumption and telling our investor, hey, we're still trying to figure out pricing, but we're assuming based on the value that we're able to provide. And we know we can provide this value. we think it's reasonable that we can charge X. And again, you just put that forth as, hey, that's an assumption, but we think it's a valid assumption based on what we know.
Okay. Thanks.
I think it's important to just market sizing the way that you talk about it. Just being clear of like, here's our, these are some of the assumptions going into how we're looking at the market and why at the end of the day, it's just like this slide is selling them on, we believe there's a big enough opportunity here to be investing our time in, and that you should be investing your dollars into us. Like, but especially early on, it is assumption, and that's fine. That's fine that this is all assumptions. Just be very clear on it. I'm going to give one other example of, this is a slightly modified way to think about the market opportunity. So Make You Safe, the addressable market, they're starting with, hey, this is the US addressable market. They give a couple different data points. There's 32 million workers in high-risk industries. There are 1.6 million workers covered by, if they had 5% market penetration, that would be 1.6 million workers that they would be covered. And with that 5% market penetration, they are projecting an annual recurring revenue of $211 million. I'm going to just give a little side commentary here. Really early on in their startup journey, Make You Safe, was showing this to some investors, and especially local investors were like, wait a minute, you're telling me you're going to get to 211 million of revenue? You have no revenue. You don't even have a product. And I think Gabe had to get really refined in how he talked about this, of saying, hey, I'm not saying that I'm going to get to 211 million in 5 years. Like, I realize that that's not the case. What I'm trying to say is there's a massive opportunity here only if I have 5% of the market. So you kind of can get kind of kickback either way. I always say it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't, and just kind of knowing that going in. Some investors are going to say, what? Like, that's so unbelievable. Like, I don't believe anything that you're saying. And you as the entrepreneur have to say, I know it's a long journey. I know I'm really early, but there is a massive opportunity here. And that was really kind of what I think Gabe had to refine of, I'm not getting here in 5 years, but there's a big opportunity here. And I'm really excited to challenge the market and have the opportunity to work on it. Mike, I think you maybe came off mute at one point. I didn't know if you had anything to add, but.
I was just going to suggest that after you do this slide, we go on break for 10 minutes and give everybody a chance to take a few steps.
Sounds good. All right, well, we will take a break and move into business model next. Let's take a break till 2:20. We'll come back together at 2:20.
Sounds good.
Did everyone do some jumping jacks, move around, take a quick jog? Mike and I were talking about, do we do these in the afternoon? Do we only do them in the morning? I know sometimes afternoon can be challenging after you've had lunch and need a third coffee for the day.
I know next spring when we do this, we're going to do it over 5 weeks and just do it in the morning as an experiment. I think we all get a little burnout after a whole day.
Yeah, I've been doing quite a bit of online stuff, and I was actually surprised. I've done a couple strategic plannings for a nonprofit, and we did 2 whole day Saturdays, and I was pleasantly surprised with the amount of engagement. I think when you're doing that kind of work, though, what I've noticed is people just naturally get tired. So this past Saturday, we had scheduled to go at 5, and around like 3, we're all kind of looking at each other like, this was enough work for today. It's better to take a break and come back to it. But Some people have said it's like easier because when you're in a room, you have to be a little more like physically on and engaged. And when you're sitting behind a computer, there's a piece of that you can relax a little bit. But I still think everything has its pros and cons, right? All right, I'm seeing, I think most people have rejoined. Thanks for turning on your video. It helps us kind of know you're there and following along, part of the journey. We're going to go next into business model. So when you think about the business model, this is your opportunity to talk about what do you charge? Is it one time, monthly, annually? Is it a subscription? What is it? What's the business model? If you know, what's your average account size? What's the customer value? And what is your potential revenue? You might not, like going from this slide, market size. Sometimes you talk about the potential revenue here. Other times I've seen where you would further refine and break out the business model here and talk about your potential revenue. A couple of things to emphasize is keep it simple. Even if you're not quite sure. So if you're early in kind of your pricing model, keep it simple. So the example of Insure Me, they keep it super simple. They said, we're going to charge, a baseline of 10K for our sales model, 10K a month for the claims model, and 10K a month for the customer service. I mean, that is super, super basic. But I think you also have to realize where they were at as a company. They were still, stress testing all their pricing and trying to figure it out. So they've kind of boiled it up of like, this is average what we're going to charge per month. I've seen startups really make this too complicated of we're going to charge X revenue for this product and X revenue for this product. And we're going to have a servicing fee of this and this and that and that. And at some point, detail is helpful, but I would also say if you think about the lens of this is your first meeting with an investor, you don't want to get completely sidetracked in a pricing conversation, nor do you maybe want to turn them off. There's certain investors that don't like revenue coming from service. They really want to know the bulk of your revenue is coming from your SaaS product or your technology. So let them fall in love with you. Let them really like the problem and solution you're solving before you get too deep into pricing models and maybe philosophies around that. Aaron, I'm curious, you're kind of still trying to figure out your pricing. Do you think you'll have it more nailed down by the time that you're looking to raise investment, or how do you think you'll position this based on where you're currently at?
Yeah, I think I have some ideas. I mean, like I said, I'm starting to nail down what the value is for the customer. And since it's a software solution, I think there's a few rules of thumb out there about, how much value you're producing for the customer, what percentage of that might you be able to charge in this case, and how to do it. The deployment's kind of the thing that I'm still trying to figure out. Is it a subscription based? Is it just one-time license, that sort of thing?
Not to jump in without knowing your solution too much. I think that there tends to be in the software kind of tech area that people love to see reoccurring revenue. So if you can think about where's my reoccurring revenue opportunity, that's something that investors tend to really like to see. So you might think about positioning it like that. The other thing is maybe trying to market test what's normal in this industry. I've loved where entrepreneurs have come back and said, yeah, it would be great if we charged like that, but no one in this industry has ever done it. Is that the way I want to start? And I'm always like, great point, valid, your customer. If there's a pricing model that works better in this industry, that's potentially the starting point before you introduce something that's completely unique. So also thinking about the industry and how are they used to buying things. Ultimately, you want to create like a business model that doesn't have a ton of friction in it. So mapping to something that they're used to is also kind of a lens in which you could look at it.
Is there a good resource for, finding that sort of data?
Well, there's a lot of tech companies. It depends, right? Is it an enterprise sale or is it something that people are used to buying online? I think based on, sorry, can you hear that dinging? Does that, I'm sorry, my phone's rings through to my computer. So even though it's on mute, hopefully that stops. It's annoying to me. So depending on what industry you're in, some industries are more open. You can find a lot of information online as far as like what competitors are charging, what their pricing models are. Other times it requires you to, build some relationships with your customers, and build relationships in which you can start to ask the questions, like what types of other services you're buying, is there an average amount that you're used to paying for those? Is there a process in which you would have to go through to get approved? I know some companies, they set their pricing models like just below like a threshold of being able to have like an individual sign off on it versus having to go kind of through a corporate buying cycle. Those are things that you might want to think through. And back to your original question of like, how do you find that data? What can you find online versus what do you have to, build relationships and start to ask people about?
It even goes as far as if you're like dealing with large engineering organizations, how does the company look at engineering expenses? Do they look at it as if the expense reduces the cost of the product, do they allow that to reflect on the cost of the product, or do they say no, engineering, you have to pay for that anyway? I mean, you get into some pretty esoteric stuff, but Teresa's right. You have to look at what the industry is used to, and what their normal buying habits are, because it's hard to break habit.
One other thing I think about is pricing, is coming up with tiers potentially, like not to be cliche, but like the gold, silver, bronze package, where you're able to say, I think roughly there's the upper end where I'm going to be able to sell more. And this is the type of pricing model I'm thinking for. And then here's kind of the entry point, and really pushing that pricing up, $10,000 a month might seem like a lot to you, but is a customer willing to pay for that, right? And how do you build products and services where you can continue to increase that opportunity, and laying it out of, it might not be one package, but there's multiple price points, and I'm going to be building features and services around those price points. Another thing, I don't know if any of you have kind of a freemium model. That can be a sticky point. Freemium is seeming to kind of lose its, luster. I think over time it's proved to not convert real well. So you have to think about, are you offering kind of a free product? And I'm seeing more often than not, Mike, you might speak to this, where it's like free for 30 or 60 days, but beyond that, you're not offering something for free. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think what I see is more and more is we'll give you 90 days free, but to get that, you have to sign up with your credit card, and then you have to cancel it. And part of it is that free has no value. I mean, I used to be in an industry where my main competitor would give away pilot system for free, and we literally wouldn't do it. So we'd go to the same customer and say, well, they gave us theirs for free. And we'd say, look, we'll give you 90% off, but we can't do free, right? And one of the reasons we did it was whoever had to actually pay for something was much more responsible to the company to show value. So because they paid for ours, they tend to use ours first or try ours first. And so you're just trying to get at, are they serious or not? Because you can waste so much money on customers that aren't serious, right? Give me a free pilot. Well, do they ever even use it? That's not always the case.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I like to think through from an investment standpoint when you're thinking through business model is like the scalability. So is, the annual contract value $5,000? Is it $500? Is it $10,000? And then as an investor, I want to think about scale. So how much work does it cost to get a $500 contract? How much work does it cost to get a $5,000 contract? How much work how much work and what does it cost to get the $50,000 contract? And sometimes I don't always believe people have a scalable business model in the sense of, they think it's great that they have $1,000, you know, a customer that pays them $1,000, but it took so much effort and training and onboarding to get $1,000. So thinking through that price point of, do I believe you can scale? Do I believe you can find the customer, sign them up, and get them using the product? And does that make sense for the amount that you're charging them?
A real simple way to look at it is if you can understand the cost of acquiring a customer, they call it CAC, customer acquisition cost, is, you know, how long does it take for you to recoup your customer acquisition costs? You know, there's a lot of complex ways of looking at this, but the simplest one is, my price is $5,000. It costs me $3,000 to get a customer. Therefore, I recoup it in 7.5 months or 8 months, whatever the math works out to be. That's a really simple metric to say, wow, I can reuse my money almost 3 times every 2 years. Well, if it's $5,000 only costs $1,000 to acquire a customer, that means I can reuse that money 12 times. I mean, keep reusing it over and over every month and get another customer. And you can see how it would snowball very quickly. So understanding the cost of acquiring a customer really, and even at the pitch level, is as important as understanding the price point, because to your deal, you know, there's not a ton of people doing this kind of design. So you already know all those people. You can call them up. I mean, we can find those people. It's pretty straightforward. You get in other industries where, you know, they do everything they can to hide from you. You can spend months or years trying to get to your customer.
All right, moving on to competition. So in the competition side, starting to think about who are you competing against? What makes you different / better? The more research you can do into your competition, the better. It's better to identify as many of your competitors, or at least have the knowledge about them, right? You might not put them all in your slide deck, but have a lot of knowledge about them, because Mike can tell great stories where, you know, he's had a meeting with a startup and they're like, we have no competitors. And then Mike goes on Crunchbase or PitchBook or something and finds, you know, 100 other companies that are tagged with the kind of same technology and could be competitors. So do your research on that. And an investor really is not going to believe that you have no competitors, right? Even if you're new to the space, there's going to be something you're competing against, even if it's status quo. And being able to talk about, hey, I'm competing with old technology. I'm competing with an Excel spreadsheet. That's technology, right? And you're trying to convince someone that there's a better way of doing it. Finding ancillary ways. Maybe there's not an exact product that competes with you, but maybe there's something else that your customer is spending money on, and how big a budget do they have to spend on software? So in some sense, you're competing against potentially tangential software. Here's a way that you might think about laying out your competition. So instead of putting your company name and a whole bunch of feature lists and comparing everyone based on features, think about how you would think about the entire landscape. And this gets a little bit into, I like here, so Insure Me, you know, they're saying we win because we have a robust multi-feature platform. So that's one axis in which they're competing, and they're digital and automated. So that's why they're winning, because they're a robust, feature-rich platform, and they have a digital automated solution. So you can start to see, you know, there's a couple competitors that are pretty close to them, and when they're talking to investors, they have to be prepared to talk about, you know, why are they better than these two that are kind of close to them. I know that they'll say, you know, Marley only focuses on a niche part, and therefore we think, you know, having a more broad feature platform adds benefit than just focusing on a niche. But they also lay out here, you know, really what I call competing with the status quo. They talk about how really they're potentially replacing call center representatives. They're potentially replacing agent and brokers. They're completely competing against kind of this offline manual paper and phone solution. So it's not just, you know, how many of the companies are they competing against, but, you know, ultimately what's the full landscape look like in which they're bringing their solution into market. I'm going to give everyone a little bit of time, till about 2:40, to be thinking about your competitive landscape. If you were to put an X and Y axes, what would you think about those X and Y axes? All right, competitive landscape. Is this easy? Is it hard? How are you doing? I often find sometimes this is the hardest slide in the whole deck, to be honest. It takes lots of iteration. Sometimes it just starts to, I've seen some people just start to map out, okay, who are all the possible people I'm competing with? And the matrices aren't even clear until you start to just put the whole landscape out there. Feedback, Aaron, Mark, Bunker Labs, and Mahesh, is that how you say your name? Cool. Thoughts on competitive landscape?
I actually love this slide, and that is those axes that you showed are like perfect for us to show our where we lie in the competitive landscape, because for the most part we're competing against the traditional offline manual processes. There are a few companies that are doing a very, very small part of what we're trying to do. So those would be very niche. So this was actually kind of eureka to me.
Oh, good. Glad it was helpful.
Charisse, I think, so in my business, we're providing health supplements. So we make probiotics and so on. And yeah, this is a question that we've been grappling with for quite a while. Who are our competitors, and where do we sit in this landscape? So, one way that we have been working with is we sell primarily through Amazon, and so we look in Amazon and see who are the competitors there, and we try and work out who are we competing against, and that's one way that we've done it. When we go out to when we're outside of Amazon, I think then we get to compete with a lot of the other bigger people like Align and Culturel and so on, and we don't compete so well. So in the initial space, while we're small, Amazon has been really good at giving us that kind of information.
That's interesting. And how do you, some of it also comes to sales and marketing. How do you, not only like thinking about this for an investor, but like, how are you selling differently? How are you marketing yourself differently in the Amazon platform? Why would I buy your solution over someone else's?
Yeah, sure. So what we try and do is we try and look at our product not necessarily as a probiotic. So typically, if you look at the way Align and Culturel pitch themselves, they just pitch themselves as a single-use product for one reason. And so what we try and do is we try and differentiate ourselves by saying that we're a probiotic, and we include various other ingredients that it gives multi-functions to our product. So not only are you addressing one specific aspect, your gut health, but we're trying to address other aspects of your health as well. So like immune health and liver health and cardiovascular health. So we're trying to build in a number of different functions into the same product at the same time as providing a nutritional component for the individual. So we try and so it's not just a probiotic for gut wellness, it's a probiotic for whole body wellness.
Interesting. Right, so it's like this robust multi-feature, even though you're not a platform, you're
exactly.
So you're more robust, and you're basically positioning yourself because we're more, we have more value than basically a niche solution. So that's kind of one of your competitive landscape, maybe axes. Sometimes I also see your sales methodology could sometimes be something that you're saying, we have our competitive landscape, just like this digital automated or offline manual. You might even think about, do you position yourself differently in the way that you do distribution? Might be a way that you think about competition. So
I think that's a good point. And this chart is very helpful. I haven't seen anything like this before, so using this I think it's gonna be an interesting exercise for us.
Yeah, I think you might have seen online a lot of times where you compare yourself on features, And what I don't like about that is I don't always feel like it's clear to an investor like why you win. It's sort of like, okay, 4, 5, 6 features that like, oh, maybe you're one checkbox different than your competitor.
Exactly.
And as an investor, I'm like, okay, is that a big deal? Is it not a big deal? What if they add that check? Like, does that substantially change anything about why you win? So I kind of like this a little bit better because you know, Marley, for example, they would say we win because we're niche. You know, it just is the way you position yourself and saying we think being niche is better than being everything. But they're able to say people buy us because that difference, rather than just like a specific check mark.
Absolutely. I think that's a good
Any
point.
other questions, feedback, thoughts on competition before we move on? Okay, we're going to keep moving. Competitive advantage. Again, there's sometimes where you will do both a competition slide and competitive advantages. Other times, frankly, if you're really, really early on, it might be a stretch to really make the case for like what your competitive advantage is. I don't always see very, very early companies doing competitive advantage, but we thought it would be helpful for you to kind of have the framework to think about it. So when you think about competitive advantage, this is your opportunity to talk about why do you win. There's, you know, a kind of a best practice. You often fall into one of 5 categories. Is it your product? Is it cost? Is it the way you position your brand? Is your distribution unique, or is your execution that different? Are you that far ahead when it comes to execution? I would say try to pick 1 to 2 of these areas to excel in. And a lot of times you excel based on who you are as a founder and what your background are. What are your strengths? You know, when you maybe are a tech founder, your product and technology is probably one of the areas that you say we're going to win at. You know, we have this expertise and our product is going to be far superior. If you're a salesperson by nature, right, you've grown up in kind of a sales environment, maybe your distribution is very unique and the way that you think about sales is going to give you an advantage. It might be the team that you put together that gave you some unique way to execute. Be aware of cost being your competitive advantage. Being the lowest cost provider is not always the place where you want to win. So just being the lowest cost, be careful. Is that really the thing that you want to compete on? Also, I think execution can be interesting. Sometimes I see these teams that say, you know, we have this dream team and we're going to out execute everyone. And the reality is, if a big business who really wanted to solve this problem with a bunch of really smart people put a lot of money behind it, would you really be able to say you're gonna compete based on execution? Maybe, but be ready to defend that if you put it on there. Questions, comments, feedback on competitive advantage.
I think one thing I would add is don't be the best at everything. I think the biggest turnoff is, you know, we're the lowest price, highest featured, most valued, most trusted. No, you're not. You're just not. So to Shreesa's point, pick 1 or 2 things to excel at. And don't be afraid to say, you know, we're about equal with everybody else on cost. It's the market's the market. We're not going to play there. There's not a lot of room.
I think investors often looking for like your realistic assessment versus you to be overselling on, you know, kind of micro points that may or may not be true when you're pushed on it. Here's just like a finer kind of tuned look at those areas: product, cost, positioning, distribution, execution. So as you're thinking about, okay, how do I think about product? Why, you know, what are the words I would use to say my product is better? I like this, you know, does your product create a barrier to switch? That's an interesting standpoint of like why my product is better. Obviously ease of use. You know, how are you positioning? Is your IP just very unique and putting you in a different spot? Word of caution on IP. I was recently talking to a founder. They're like, we have all these patents. There's no way, you know, if a big company wanted to do what we were going to do, they could do it because we have all the IP. And I was like, well, they have a lot more money. So are you really going to fight them on IP? It's good to have your IP protected, but don't be unrealistic about what that would actually take to defend your IP if a big dog was to go after you. We've talked about cost here. Positioning. You know, it's interesting. There's some Amazon, in some sense, when it comes to product, has created this interesting thing when it comes to brand and positioning. They've somewhat leveled the playing field and created access to a lot of different companies. When you're thinking about a SaaS company or tech company, you know, positioning and how are you positioning yourself online? How are people finding you? How are they potentially buying you? I think that that's a really interesting thing to be thinking about long term. You know, what is your brand and what does it stand for? How are people finding you? All right, moving on. So slide 8, go-to-market marketing plan. On this slide, it's thinking about how do you sell your product? What channels are you focused on? Are you selling direct, selling online? Are you going through channel partners? Are you anticipating organic signups? Are you selling to enterprises? Are you going to be selling via partnerships? How are you going about doing it? And probably more important, what validation do you have that your plans will work? I think that's a really important piece of your go-to-market, especially when you're early on. You know, you might have hypothesis around phase 1. It's going to look like this, phase 2, phase 3. Sometimes putting it out as phases can help show that it's just like assumption. I've seen where people are like, oh, we're going to have a channel strategy. I'm like, okay, what channel partners have you talked to? None. Right? So if you're going to put that on there, either show that it's so far in the future that you don't have it figured out, or be prepared to really talk about how you're going to use channel partners to go to market. Showing some realistic of, you know, maybe phase 1 is selling through direct channels, and this is the traction we have. We think that we're going to have that, you know, we're going to be able to sell this way. You want to be able to have some proof points if you can. Here's a little example of Make You Safe. So their starting point is selling direct to customers. They are able to kind of validate that. Currently, you know, when this deck I think was from like about a year and a half ago. At that point, they were able to say we're currently working with multiple Fortune 500 companies. They talk about the self-insured and the companies that sell or they have insurance directly, and how they're kind of going about aiming at those customers. They give a little bit of like the customer profile. Our direct customer averages 19,000 employees. So as an investor, I understand, okay, you're not going after the manufacturer that has 100 employees. This is like a bigger sale. And they also kind of talk about who their customers are. So their customers, they're looking in logistics, manufacturing, and construction. So any kind of customer profiling you're able to put in here, I think is helpful to an investor's understanding, you know, how far are you in determining who your customer is? Do you know who your customer is? What does that profile look like?
I would also say here, this is a good place to show that you're being logical and saying, our first market, you know, segment we're going after is not the biggest. It's the easiest to get. We're going after this particular subset or segment or piece of the market simply because they're ready to adopt now. And that'll give us the credibility to go after the major market down the road. So,
Mike, I think that's a great point. I've seen kind of entrepreneurs flounder in 2 ways. One, they're too near term, that they don't give me as an investor kind of a bigger, like, okay, what's the long-term scalable path? Or they're so focused on scalability that I don't actually believe that they're able to sell the next 12 months. So how you kind of articulate both, I think, can be really impactful of, this is realistically what I'm doing now, but I have a bigger vision, and this is sort of what I'm thinking that could look like.
yeah, when you're dealing with enterprise or large account sales, I mean, as an investor, one of the first things I'll ask you is, can you name 10 customers today that you're in negotiations with or that you've talked to? Who are the first 10 customers? It's easy to say it's a big market and there's all this and there's all that. How many have you actually talked to? What are their names? How'd the discussion go?
All right. Also, Make You Safe basically was selling in a 2-pronged way. So they outlined both, right? We're selling direct to customers, and this is what that customer profile looks like, and this is how we're selling to them. And they also said, you know, we're commercializing with insurance. So this is sort of like their channel strategy. And they're able to say, you know, we have $5 million in sales with insurance carriers. That's like a big number. And it shows that they're currently working with 6 insurance carriers. So if you ask them, they would be able to, like Mike said, tell you who those customers are. Slide 9, this is getting into team. This is the opportunity to highlight any special talents or expertise that make your team, you know, really well situated to build this business. Who are the key players? Who are your board of directors? Do you have an advisory board? Who's all on there? It's okay to have some holes. One of the mistakes I see so often is people overinflate titles. And frankly, you know, seeing a 25-year-old as a CTO is not always the most believable. So just be aware of, like, does that person actually hold that title, or are you just giving them a title because you feel like you need it? It's okay. Investors, especially early on, know that you don't have all the holes filled. They would rather see kind of a sense of realism than, oh, check mark, they have these 3 positions filled within their team. Also, giving me some background. You know, I think you only have so much room on this slide and it's a lot to fit in, but helping me kind of have some viewpoint of why is this the right team. What I like, I'm gonna just kind of dissect this a little bit. So Gabe Glenn, he's the founder. You know, he's like not super old, not super young, but I think he does a nice job of saying, you know, I'm not super seasoned, but I have had multiple successful startups. I've sold a startup before. I have a lot of credibility in the manufacturing industry. He also talks about how he's surrounded himself with a really diverse board with a bunch of smart people. I think that, you know, he really sells that of this, you know, I might not be 60 years old, but I've put myself positioned with a lot of smart people that are, you know, helping me on this journey. He's also able to kind of round out his team with a very experienced co-founder and CTO, 25 years in the tech industry. I think that people are like, oh, okay, you got the tech handled. You have someone that has been around the block there. Looking at, like, how is he handling accounting, et cetera. It'd be interesting to see his team slide now. He's kind of actively getting ready for another fundraise here in the next year. His team has grown from, you know, 3 to 4 people to 25 plus. So how he shifts this, you know, likely Mike and I probably aren't going to be on his slide, even though we continue to advise him, but we're not, you know, the part that he's highlighting anymore. As he's built out his team, you know, he might even move his board and directors to a separate slide and highlight, okay, I've gone from 3 to 4 people to 20 people, and this is kind of, you know, the structure of what my team looks like. So this changes over time and how you position it. Any questions when it comes to team? I'm never a fan of like big biographies. Just give me enough information that kind of piques my interest, but keep it kind of short, succinct, allow people to ask more questions. When it comes to advisory board, you know, this is not expected, but it can be helpful, especially early on, that you may not have a board of advisors. So surrounding you with an advisory board could be a benefit. Know what you want from them, and think about managing your time to getting them up to speed. Be mindful of how you're portraying them in your pitch. Know that they're part of your pitch. If you put an advisor on here, Mike and I have had this happen before where we might have advised a company last year, haven't talked to them in the last 6 months. And I've been like emailed before by an investor saying, hey, I see you're an advisor on this company. Can I set up a call with you? And I'm kind of like thinking to myself, it would have been nice to know that. I haven't talked to that entrepreneur for 6 months. So if you're going to put advisors on here, it's important that you're keeping them updated and that they know that you're, you know, part of your pitch, because investors will back channel, you know, and reach out and try to get kind of another viewpoint. Traction. If I could put this slide first in the deck, and that it would be normal. If you have it, maybe changing the order might be beneficial. I just can't highlight the importance of traction enough. And as I've talked about momentum, really being able to show, hey, we're onto something. We have some momentum. We're the hot startup. Get on the train. We're moving fast. This really has an important piece, I think, in convincing investors that now is the time that they should invest rather than later. Highlighting accomplishments today. So depending on which stage you're at, this can mean different things. It could be product traction, sales traction, marketing traction, user customer traction. Here's two examples, both Insure Me and Make You Safe. They've laid it out in different ways. If it makes sense to do it as a timeline and you're able to hit kind of these key milestones, that might be one route. If you want to do it as bullet points, hey, this is where we're at as far as sales. This is how much money we've raised. This is where we've been featured. Again, the opportunity here is, to show that you have momentum, that you're moving forward, and that the time is now for an investor to invest. Mike, any other thoughts, comments on traction?
I think that you can get a little too deep here if you're not careful on what your traction really is. But I think it's your chance to show that you know what you're about as far as taking a customer through that sales cycle. So if you can say, I've got, 5 closed deals, 8 post-demo deals, and 21 demo requests, or something like that. I think showing the whole pipeline of activity, not just I won 5 deals. Well, if you won 5 deals and that's all you're going to get, not so great. But if you're showing that you know how to find the customer, acquire the customer, get them interested, get them to a demo, get them to negotiations, I think there's value in that.
I think anywhere your traction can show you de-risk the situation a little bit also can be helpful. I feel like the last couple of weeks I was talking with a startup, and they were almost ashamed of putting their multiple product iterations on here because they thought it looked bad. And I was like, no, absolutely. That shows progress. It shows that you had something, you tested it, you got feedback, you iterated on it. Don't be ashamed that your V1 might look completely different than V2. To me, as an investor, it means you've learned something. It means that you're able to take feedback and change. So yeah, just thinking through those product traction things might not seem so linear, but they can be really helpful in showing that you've de-risked something. All right, moving on to the fundraising slide. So on this slide, there's kind of multiple pieces of information you can highlight. This goes back to strategy. So if you're setting the terms, this is where you could put those terms. How much are you raising? What kind of round is this? Is it an angel? Is it seed? What kind of instrument is it? Is it debt? Is it equity? In this case, they were doing a convertible note. So they put what the discount is, what the valuation cap was, how much runway is this raise going to get you? So is this like a 9-month raise? Is this an 18-month raise? What's the amount of runway that it gets you? If you are looking for an investor to lead your round, you would not have a lot of this information on. You would probably just say, my fundraise is a $1 million raise, and it's a seed round, and you want to put this other information on. So it depends. Again, what's your strategy? Are you setting the terms? Are you looking for the investor to set terms? You would just structure this accordingly. And I really like the way they put their use of proceeds on here. It might be kind of small. I might actually see if I can zoom in on this a second. They, I think, did a really nice job, not just saying like, hey, we're going to invest in product or we're going to invest in marketing, but they had very clear milestones that they put in here. So for their use of proceeds, you would follow this up with a very detailed pro forma, but they were really trying to highlight to an investor, hey, we're going to take this $1 million and invest in 3 areas: product development, sales and marketing, and operations. And in product development, They were planning on hiring 2 developers, 1 project manager, and designer. And the goal there was to reach, key product milestones. In working with this company, I know that they had a whole product roadmap that they had. They didn't go into it in this pitch, but they had it. And they said, these are the milestones. These are the product features that we want to launch. And we think this is the team that's going to take to get us there. Under sales and marketing, hire a marketing manager and 2 sales reps. The goal there is to secure at least 10 more paid pilots. Again, it's not just we're hiring people, but this is what we're hoping to achieve. I think that that's a really strong practice. We're not just hiring people. I've seen so many people say, like, what are you going to use the funds for? We're going to hire people. Well, great. What are those people going to do? Where are they going to get you? And then under operations and administration, this really went from like a 1 to 2 person team. So they knew as they grew that they had to improve their operational efficiency and how they handled things internally. Feedback, questions, comments when you think about how to structure your milestones and how much you're raising. All right, we'll keep on moving. Here's one more example of how you might lay out kind of key milestones, use of funds. This is from a really tech-heavy company. So for what they were really emphasizing, they were raising a decent amount of money, and a lot of it was going to go to their product. So for them, having a clear demonstration as far as what product features they were going to launch was really important in their story. It was, I think also this is a California-based company where I would say coastal VCs care a lot more about your product and tech maybe than Midwest VCs. One of the things we see in the Midwest is show me the path to revenue. They're more interested in revenue maybe than product innovation. So just keeping that in mind, where are you raising funds from, and how do you want to best represent the milestones and where you're trying to get to next? I would say this slide we've put in here is it's optional. Depending on what stage you're at, you may or may not have user testimonials. If you have them, they can be kind of like gold. Getting your customers to sell for you, talk about why your product is great, can be really helpful. They show validation and can create some excitement. You might also, sometimes you have press, sometimes you don't. So I would say the reason this is optional is you might not be at a stage yet that you have it, but if you do, it's kind of a great way to round out your pitch, letting someone else sell the investor for you based on their experience. And then wrapping up, plan to get through your entire presentation in 20 minutes or less. You want to save time for discussion. And I mean, honestly, the best meetings feel more like a conversation than a presentation. Your deck really should help guide the conversation and keep you on track. But it also, questions along the way can really, I think, impact the overall kind of effectiveness of your presentation. As you get to the end, one of the things as you're prepping, this kind of goes beyond the pitch deck, but anticipate questions and really be ready for those. Know the type of business that you're in and how is it being measured. For SaaS companies, knowing metrics such as what is your MRR, that's monthly recurring revenue, your ARR, annual recurring revenue, what's your cost of customer acquisition, what's your lifetime value, what's your run rate, what's your cash burn. Each industry kind of has these like terminologies that investors really use kind of as benchmarks. So read up on these and know the approach that you take. So for example, CAC can be calculated in lots of different ways. Just be prepared to debate your own approach, right? So there's articles and articles and articles of what should be included in CAC. Just be able to defend your position. This is what I included in my customer acquisition cost. this is how I'm thinking about lifetime value. Know your customers. As you grow, you might, as the founding team, you might become less connected to your customers, but be able to give clear use cases, paint the picture of, this is my customer, this is what they look like, this is why they buy my product. Know your industry, know your competitors. And there's a really helpful link here, 30 questions investors will ask founders. I have to say, like, having been through this process, you can prepare, and there's always going to be kind of an oddball question that you weren't ready for, but the more questions you can think ahead of time and be prepared to answer, the better. You know, I've been caught off guard several times in the fundraising process where you just hadn't thought about things. You know, you were so heads down in your company and your product that maybe you hadn't taken the time to step back and look around the landscape, look at your competitors, really think about your metrics. So the more you can prepare for that in advance, hopefully the better prepared you are to have those conversations.
And on that point, don't be afraid to say, I don't know, but I'll find out.
Yeah.
Nothing's worse than having someone pretend they know and answer something in a foolish way and say, wow, you know, if you have to say, wow, I've never been asked that question before. That's a great question. I'll tell you what, I can find out in probably the next 2 days. May I get back hold of you and tell you what the answer is? That's fine.
Yeah, there's also some investors that are just so data oriented. So they might like grill you with data questions, and data can be ever changing in your business too. And so there's a mix between, you know, knowing your numbers and knowing your business and saying, you know what, I'd prefer to follow up. I don't want to misspeak on that data point. I think it's really important. Let me follow up with an email with you. So, if you misspeak, it's okay to correct yourself later over email, then come back off as like completely uncredible. There was a meeting I was in recently where the entrepreneur like misspoke on like the market size by adding like a 0, you know, like it's 300 versus 30, you know, 300 million versus 30 million. And after the pitch, I was like, hey, you said this. Is that what you really meant? And he's like, no, I meant 30. And I was like, you might want to follow up with your audience. You know, I think we all make mistakes, but there's things like that that you can look incredible if you don't close the loop on. All right, we're going to move now into one-page summary. Are there, pitch, you know, we spent the last couple hours on this. It's a lot of information. It's a lot to digest. I think just in closing out the pitch conversation, this is a very much an iterative process. Getting your deck started, starting to get feedback. As I said, you know, I've been through this before where the deck, by the time we've closed around, you know, had 70 versions. At some point, you have to kind of call it good enough, get feedback on it, and, you know, start talking with investors. You're going to learn things in talking through investors that you can't just, you know, completely perfect in isolation. But as much of it you can think through in advance, the better. But there's only going to be a certain amount of iteration you can do on your own before you really kind of put it out into the world and get feedback.
All right, one-page summary. Tracy, you want to go to the next page here?
Yep.
So this is a Midwest only thing. It's not used on the coastlines. And I would say it's slowly becoming used less here, but it's still a great tool. So you're basically creating a single page, I'll call it a business plan, business overview. It's the 5-minute business plan document. And even if you never use this, I think it's probably a great exercise to try to build this. So if you want to go to the next page, Shrees. This just happens to be make you safe. So we've been picking on them all day here. If you look at the headings here, and you can read this on your own time, but there's a summary of what the business is, a statement of the customer problem, products and services you offer, target market and customers, sales, marketing strategies, business model, competitors, and competitive advantage. Here's the idea. If Gabe was out raising money and he sent me a note because he knows me and says, hey, I'm looking at raising a round here the next few months. And if you know somebody you think might be interested, Could you pass this along? So he's created this. This is not a pitch for money. And you got to, I said in the previous slide, run this by your lawyer. You can't proposition people for money over the email just openly. It's got to be accredited investors. But you can put together enough data for somebody to say, does this interest me? The day, you know, I still to this day get people sending unsolicited 30-page business plans. I will guarantee you, I don't read any of them. Are they crazy? You know, do you really want to read an unsolicited 30-page document? This is a document that can be consumed in 5 minutes. So let's say I pass it on to Bernie at Bunker Labs. He can look at this very quickly and says, yeah, it's in a segment I'm interested. No, I don't buy it. Just not my thing. But he then may pass it on. And it's a Midwest thing to share deals. On the coast, they fight for a piece of the deal and they fight to keep each other out of deals sometimes. Here, it's hard sometimes to close a round, to finish a round and get all the money pulled together. So we're much more the type that share. So I won't spend a ton of time on this. I know we're all kind of at the end of this time and day, but I would challenge each of you to try to write this, because it's harder to say something in 2 sentences than it is in 2 pages, right? So if you're trying to get your kind of your story down, writing this, being able to do it this succinctly, it's kind of like an elevator pitch for each section of your business. Teresa, you want to go to the next slide? Now, he happened to do a back page. And this is not a bad idea because he had some really strong talent and board. Now, sometimes people just don't even put this on here. Again, I'm not an advocate of putting everything on there. I think he was smart to do it because it's a great strength of his company. But it also was one less reason somebody might call him up. So remember, the whole reason you're doing this is to get a phone call and then a meeting and then a follow-on meeting. We'll go to the next one, Shrees. That's it. We're wrapping up. Here we are in 2 hours and 20 minutes, less than 2:20. So good. Thoughts? Other questions we didn't cover?
I would just say for those people who are going to go out and pitch, prepare for rejection. It's going to happen. I'm a very small fish in the investing space. If someone gets me with an amazing deal in February, I'm done for the year. That's just simple. But I might know people, so you do have to kind of measure out your time. How much of your time are you going to commit to all the different players? Because I might know somebody or I might not. So you're going to have to filter that for yourself. But realize that it is a process where there's a lot of rejection, but it's for your dream. And so you will get better as the things go on. And then realize that if I say some very specific points about your deck that I either love or hate, and you change your deck to follow my advice, and then you go pitch Mike, he might hate every possible thing that I say and be like, why wouldn't you do it this way, which is the original way you did it in your deck? Again, you're really trying to find the perfect date. Be prepared to jump through those flaming hoops. That's part of the process. You're asking for money from people. Good luck.
I appreciate that comment. I think I used to get sometimes frustrated by the whiplash of, you go talk to someone, they give you some piece of advice, you go talk to another person, they give completely other piece of advice. And what you have to kind of really get good at is being cordial and respectful of that feedback. But then as the entrepreneur, really deciding, how am I going to move forward? What's my strategy? What do I believe in? How am I going to talk about my business? And I've seen people get overcorrected on both ways, where they kind of like shut off and they stop listening to the feedback, and they're just like, F it, I'm going to do it my way. And, if you don't want to invest in me, you're the wrong person. They get kind of too callous and like, they don't want to accept any feedback. All the way to the other side, where you have like someone who's constantly changing their strategy of like, well, this person said maybe I should do it like this, therefore I think I should now do it like this. So it really challenges you as the entrepreneur to get a little bit more firm in what you believe, but also being still open to that feedback. It's a fine balance there. All right. We might stay on. I think last time, if anyone has any other questions or comments, Mike and I'll hang out for a little while if you want to ask something in a smaller setting. But otherwise, we very much appreciate everyone's time, and both Mike and I continue to be available to help you guys if you want to get in touch with us after today's call.